You are not supposed to know this story. The official records have been burned, the witnesses silenced, and the ground salted. But in the digital shadows, whispers remain of a classified expedition, a hidden chamber, and a man who had his future torn from his mind. The story claims that deep beneath a 15th century monastery, a single touch of a blank scroll was enough to unmake a man. When lead historian Dr. Alistair Finch reached out to touch a perfectly preserved document, his team saw no flash, no sound. But Finch began to scream, not because he'd been struck blind, but because he could feel his own future being devoured, ripped out of his consciousness like flesh from bone. He was left a shell with a past, but no tomorrow. This is the story of what they found in that room and the horrifying power that was guarding it. The Silent Vow. High in Italy's Apennine Mountains, there is a ruin the locals avoid. They call it the Monastero del Voto Silenzioso, the Monastery of the Silent Vow. Founded in the 15th century, it was a place of little note, vanishing from all records by the 1600s as if it had never been. It was this historical void that drew Dr. Alistair Finch in the early 2000s. Finch was not a man who cared for mainstream history. He was an obsessive, drawn to the dark, forgotten corners of the past. He chased whispers of heretical sects and hunted for grimoires that scholars insisted were mythical. The Monastery of the Silent Vow was an enigma he hungered to solve. His privately funded team was small and expendable. A structural engineer, a junior archaeologist, and a manuscript specialist. Their stated mission was to survey the ruins. Finch's private mission was to find what had made this place fall silent. They packed for a standard archaeological dig, expecting dust and decay. They should have packed for a descent into hell. The dead zone. For weeks, the work was frustratingly normal. But then, the ground-penetrating radar found something impossible. Deep in the sub-basement, there was a perfect 20 by 20 foot square, where all signals ceased to exist. It wasn't an obstruction, it was a void, a patch of absolute electronic silence in the heart of the mountain. Finch, his eyes alight with a feverish excitement, ordered them to dig. In the freezing damp of the crypt, their shovels hit something that wasn't stone. It was a wall of seamless, black material that felt unnervingly organic, faintly warm to the touch. It seemed to drink the light from their lamps, and one team member swore they heard a low, bass hum coming from within it. There were no seams, no mortar, and no door. Hardened steel tools couldn't scratch it. A diamond-tipped drill whined and glowed red-hot, its bit melting without leaving a single mark. This wall was not built. It felt grown. The breakthrough came when the junior archaeologist found something hidden beneath the flagstones. A complex mechanism of interlocking gears made not of metal, but of a polished, bone-like material caked in a thick, rancid grease. With a sickening, cracking sound, they forced the gears to turn. A deep groaning echoed from the mountain itself, and a section of the black wall slid upwards, revealing a doorway. The sound from within. A blast of air rushed out, but it wasn't the stale air of a tomb. It was cold, sharp, and carried a scent that made the team gag, the coppery smell of old blood and the clean, metallic tang of ozone, like the air after a lightning strike. But worse than the smell was the sound that came with it. As the door opened, a faint, wet, tearing noise echoed from the darkness within, followed by what sounded like a soft, collective sigh, as if 1,000 lungs had just exhaled at once. Shaking, but driven by Finch's relentless ambition, they stepped through the doorway and into the crushing silence beyond. The Skin Library. The chamber was a perfect cube of the same black, living stone. But what it held shattered their understanding of reality. Lining the walls from floor to ceiling were thousands of alcoves. In each one sat a scroll, tied with a leather cord that hadn't aged a day. They looked like they had been placed there that morning. But as the manuscript specialist reached for one, she recoiled. The vellum wasn't vellum. It was pale, smooth, and threaded with faint, dark veins. It felt, she whispered, like cured human skin. A frantic energy seized the team. Dr. Finch, however, was ecstatic. He had one of the scrolls carefully brought to the center of the room. On the strange, skin-like parchment, there was nothing. No ink, no faded words, no impressions. It was immaculately, perfectly blank. The team's UV imaging equipment, which can detect even the faintest trace of writing, confirmed the terrifying truth. Nothing had ever been written on it. This wasn't a library, it was a storeroom for thousands of pages of blank human skin. It was a discovery of profound horror, a riddle that screamed of blasphemy. Why would anyone build an impossible vault to store nothing? The obsession. For days, Finch led a frantic, non-contact analysis. The team subjected the scroll to every test imaginable. Carbon dating, spectral analysis, advanced imaging, and found nothing. The material defied all scientific understanding. While the team grew demoralized by the dead ends, Dr. Finch became a man possessed. He abandoned the failed science and spent hours simply sitting in the center of the room, staring at the walls of skin. He stopped sleeping. His team would find him tracing the air over the parchments, his eyes wide, his lips moving in silent conversation. He was convinced the answer was not something to be analyzed, but something to be experienced. The others were no longer afraid of the room, they were afraid of him. On their last day, Finch stood before them, his eyes burning with a terrifying revelation. "We've been trying to read it," he said, his voice a dry rasp. "But they are not meant to be read, they are meant to be felt." Before anyone could react, he did the unthinkable. He tore off his archaeological gloves. The first touch. With a trembling, bare hand, Finch reached out and pressed the fingertips of his right hand against the smooth, cool surface of the skin-like scroll. The effect was instantaneous and horrific. The team saw the patch of parchment beneath his fingers darken, turning a bruised purple. A wisp of smoke curled from his skin with the smell of cooking meat. Finch's eyes rolled back in his head. A choked, guttural shriek tore from his throat as his whole body convulsed, and he collapsed to the floor, thrashing like an animal. When they rushed to him, he was clawing at his own face. "It's empty! It's all empty!" he screamed, his voice raw with an agony they couldn't comprehend. They pulled his hands away from his face to find his eyes wide, staring, but utterly vacant. He was blind, but it was worse than that. As they dragged him from the chamber, he grabbed the archaeologist, his grip like a vice, and rasped the words that would haunt them forever. "It didn't just take my sight," he sobbed, pure terror in his voice. "It scraped my future out of my head." The unseen diagnosis. The aftermath was a nightmare of confusion and state-enforced secrecy. Finch was evacuated. The official story, a sudden brain aneurysm. The rest of the team was detained by shadowy government agents. Their equipment, notes, and photos were confiscated. Under threat, they signed NDAs that buried the discovery forever. The team members scattered, several reportedly suffering from severe paranoia and breakdowns. The junior archaeologist vanished without a trace 2 years later. Finch's medical reports, leaked by a terrified intern, were even more disturbing. Top specialists found nothing wrong with his eyes or brain. He was perfectly healthy, yet completely blind. But the true horror was psychological. He described the moment of contact as a devouring void, an inverse flood of information that left nothing behind. He remembered his past perfectly, but he could no longer conceive of a future. He couldn't imagine eating breakfast the next day or what he would do in an hour. When asked to think about tomorrow, he would simply start to weep, describing a hollow space in his mind where his hopes and dreams used to be. He had become a man trapped in the ever-dwindling moment of now. A heretical theory. With the official record erased, the only truth remains in the terror-filled rumors leaked by the expedition's survivors. They speak of a heretical 15th century cult who believed that human potential, our future, was not our own. It was a debt owed to a nameless cosmic entity. The monastery was not a place of worship, but a gruesome bank. The chamber was its vault, and the scrolls were not records but ledgers of flesh. Each scroll was tied to a living soul, a blank page waiting for the final debt to be paid. They weren't empty because they were unused. They were empty because the lives they were tied to were not yet over. They were a library of unwritten, unclaimed futures waiting to be collected. Paying the debt. If this theory is true, what happened to Alistair Finch was not an accident. He was a man hungry for forbidden knowledge, and in that chamber he found it. By touching the scroll with his bare skin, an act of intimate biological connection, he didn't just touch a ledger. He offered himself as payment. He closed his own account. The scroll he touched was no longer blank. One of the last, terrified entries in a smuggled journal describes the moment after Finch collapsed. As he lay screaming on the floor, the team looked back at the scroll. A single, wet, glistening line of crimson was being drawn across the skin-like parchment, as if by an invisible quill. His future wasn't erased. It was being consumed. It was the final entry in the ledger of his life. This horror reframes another detail from the leaks: the faint, desperate scratch marks found on the black stone wall inside the chamber. Were they from someone trying to claw their way out? Or were they from the countless victims whose futures were stored in that room, trying to claw their way back into existence? The story of Dr. Alistair Finch and the monastery of the Silent Vow is a chilling reminder that some doors are meant to remain unopened. The official story is that none of this ever happened. But if it did, what do you think was truly happening in that room? What would you do if you found a library of unwritten lives? Let us know your darkest theories in the comments below. And if you have a thirst for the stories that lurk in the world's shadows, subscribe to our channel and join us in the dark.